Something which I very much appreciate in a singer is individuality. It's nice to be able to say after hearing just one phrase, "Aha, that's so-and-so." And this week I've chosen to talk about one of the great individualists of international opera, the Canadian dramatic tenor Jon Vickers. Jon Vickers with the opening of On with the Motley from Leoncavallo's opera I Pagliacci. I was lucky enough to hear Vickers make his Vienna debut in that role back in the days when I was a student in the opera school there. I remember a friend of mine in the State Opera Company being vastly impressed when Vickers lost his patience at a rehearsal, smashed a chair on stage and stormed out of the building. In that part of the world they appreciate a bit of what they call temperament. And certainly the main impression which Vickers' performance made on me was one of enormous strength. Not just vocal strength, though there was plenty of that, but of something elemental, potentially explosive about the man on stage. He just wasn't cast in the same mould as any other singer. And every role I've heard him in since has left me with the same feeling. Vickers is not a typical Verdi singer, he's not a typical Wagner singer, he's not a typical Benjamin Britten singer. He's Jon Vickers, and he puts his own stamp on things. Even in oratorio, where many singers adopt a slightly detached attitude, the theme is religious, the music is sacrosanct. Vickers can't help creating an atmosphere of intense personal involvement.
He that dwelleth in heaven shall laugh them to scorn. The Lord shall have them in derision. Them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel, like a potter's vessel. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel.
Jon Vickers with a characteristically sturdy rendering of one of the tenor solos from Handel's Messiah. Vickers was born in Saskatchewan in 1926, and his early ambition was to become a doctor. It's funny how many singers I know who've started life with half an eye on a career in medicine. Singing always seems to emerge victorious, and thus the world may have lost a lot of good doctors, though in Vickers' case he could hardly have made more of a mark on medicine than he has on opera. In fact, the way things turned out for the young Mr. Vickers was that he worked in a grocery store in Winnipeg, while singing on the side as an amateur. He then crossed his Rubicon by enrolling in the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto, and in due course, after several stage appearances in Canada, he was unveiled in 1957 as a great new discovery by the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. After encouraging successes in Verdi's Ballo and Bizet's Carmen, he was entrusted with a major challenge, the vital role of Aeneas in London's very first production of Berlioz's mammoth masterwork, The Trojans. This was the role which really put Vickers on the map. And here he is, partnered by the British mezzo Josephine Vesey as Dido, Queen of Carthage, revelling in a nuit d'ivresse, a night of rapture. Jon Vickers and Josephine Vesey drift off together into the Carthaginian night, part of the love duet from Berlioz's The Trojans. The rarest bird in the operatic aviary has always been the really robust dramatic tenor, able to tackle without batting an eyelid the remorseless demands of Richard Wagner. But within a year of his Covent Garden Aeneas, Vickers was appearing in that mecca of all things Wagnerian, the Bayreuth Festival. His introductory role there was Siegmund in Die Walküre, and it fitted him like a glove. In the first act, Siegmund, on the run and weaponless, takes refuge in a stranger's house. He and the stranger's wife feel an overwhelming force drawing them together, and we'll join them as they gradually realise that they're twin brother and sister, torn from one another back in early childhood. Siegmund is then called upon to perform a deed of mighty physical prowess. Plunged deep in the trunk of an age-old ash tree is a magic sword, left there by the twins' father to be plucked out by Siegmund in his hour of need. Now, I mentioned earlier Vickers' formidable strength. He's a really powerfully built individual. The first thing I learnt about him when I met him during those early Pagliacci performances in Vienna was that his handshake was something to be wary of. And whereas so many Siegmunds leave you thinking, well, if he could get that sword out, anybody could, with Vickers there was always a feeling of total physical conviction. He was able to achieve an atmosphere on stage worthy of Wagner's white-hot trumpet calls in the orchestra pit. Jon Vickers, partnered this time by the Dutch soprano G. Brouwenstein, carries all before him in Wagner's Die Walküre. Now, a frequent trouble with really big-voiced dramatic singers is that in developing the ability to sing extremely loud, they lose the knack of being able to sing in any other way. But here again Vickers doesn't conform, and most untypically for a Heldentenor, a heroic tenor, Vickers is no mean singer of Lieder, the German classical songs. In a song such as Täuschung, Illusion, from Schubert's Winterreise cycle, Vickers proves that he has no difficulty in the creation of atmosphere, even when he's working, so to speak, in miniature. The song depicts a desolate wanderer, following through the icy night a light which flickers in the distance. He knows that it's an illusion, but if the illusion that it promises is one of a warm home and a friendly smile, he's happy to be deceived by it.
ganz freundlich vor mir hin. Ich folg ihm nach die Kreuz und quer. Ich folg ihm gern und seh sie mal. Das erste Leuchten war das Mann. Ach, der wie so elend ist, gibt gern sich hinter bunten List, die hinter Eis und Nacht und Graus ihm weist ein helles, armes Haus und eine liebe Seele drin, nur Täuschung ist für mich Gewinn.
Jon Vickers with an intensely personal rendering of Schubert's Täuschung. Vickers' ability to mingle lyrical and dramatic singing has always stood him in good stead when tackling another of his favourite operatic characters, Benjamin Britten's haunted and doom-laden Suffolk fisherman, Peter Grimes. This is a multifaceted role if ever there was one. How else could its two most celebrated interpreters so far have been tenors as dissimilar in every way as Jon Vickers and Peter Pears? Vickers takes a more rugged view of the part than Pears used to, but there's no denying his effectiveness in the introspective passages as well as in the violent outbursts of passion. Grimes is a rough, tough man, obsessive about his work, and when a young apprentice dies in his boat during a storm, the local coroner tells him not to hire another boy assistant. Grimes ignores this instruction, and in the so-called hut scene we find him urging the new apprentice, in none too gentle a manner, to pull himself together and get ready to go to sea. There's a shoal of herring in, and Grimes means to land them. But he too, like the wanderer in Schubert's song, is chasing an illusion. The illusion that when he's become rich from all this grinding labour, he'll settle down with Ellen, the village schoolmistress, to a life of domestic coziness. These shifting moods are wonderfully captured in Britten's score, and they're faithfully mirrored in the anguish and desperation of Vickers' performance.
Look, now's a chance. The whole sea's boiling. Get the nets. Come, boy. They listen to money. These were gossips. Listen to money. All in the money. Our business is dry. Not the market. Now is our chance to get a good catch. Get money to chop on the spot. I will set up with house and home and shop. Hi, Mary Ellen, hi. Hi, Mary Ellen.
Jon Vickers with one of Benjamin Britten's most evocative inspirations, the hut scene from Peter Grimes. I can never hear that passage without being carried back to an incident in the Edinburgh Festival of 1968. I was in the wings of the King's Theatre waiting to go on as Grimes in that particular scene, when a colleague asked me, "Aren't you supposed to be singing in Prague next week?" I whispered back that I was, and how much I was looking forward to it. To which he replied, "Well, you won't be going. The Russians have just invaded." All one wants, to ensure total concentration on the hut scene. But to return to Jon Vickers. Since following him to Bayreuth earlier in the programme, I haven't said any more about the way his career developed, because from that moment onwards it simply pursued a straight path to the top. Vienna, Paris, La Scala Milan, the Metropolitan Opera, New York, these and all the other best operatic addresses were where Jon Vickers was soon to be found. The life of the international superstar is not a settled one, but Vickers has always been a keen family man, just as well as he has 5 children, and he's a great believer in the open-air life. In his work, he's always been a stubborn perfectionist, which hasn't necessarily endeared him to all his colleagues, and it's probably no coincidence that many of his most memorable performances and several of his most impressive recordings have been in conjunction with that other formidable perfectionist, Herbert von Karajan. The Vickers Karajan Tristan and Isolde, for instance, set a standard which I would scarcely expect to hear improved upon. But to end this programme, I would like to turn to one of their collaborations in the Italian repertoire, Verdi's Otello. Otello, like Peter Grimes, is a role which allows Vickers to live his way deep into the psyche of the character he's representing. He's another soul in torment. This torment reaches a climax in the finale to Act 2, the electrifying duet in which Otello and the villainous Iago swear, as Shakespeare puts it, by yond marble heaven, to wreak a hideous revenge for the entirely fictitious infidelity of Otello's wife, Desdemona. The Iago on this recording is the British baritone Peter Glossop, and it's greatly to his credit that he can keep his end up in partnership with quite such a titanic Otello as Jon Vickers.
Si pel ciel memoria giura, aria tolta in polveri, sacra argenti, core, braccio ed anima, sangue d'opere cruenti.
Jon Vickers in the title role and Peter Glossop as Iago in the Act 2 finale of Verdi's opera Otello brings to an end this week's Singer's Choice.